This meeting is going to be recorded. I'm going to start that recording now. So just so you know, we will post this recording to our LCAP website at the conclusion of tonight's meeting. So in the room with us today, we have Ms. Sharon Kusea, who is our Assistant Superintendent of Instructional Services. Also with us tonight is Assistant Superintendent Dr. John Paramo. And also with us is Dr. Peter Knapik, Director of Elementary Education. Tonight we'll be presenting information on instructional services and our goal 1 of the LCAP geared towards supporting students to be college and career ready.
Rob, and I also want to introduce board member Abby Panzer-Kamkar is here in the room, and then also our principal from Disney Elementary School, Ms. Harris, is here too.
Thanks, Peter. I don't see everybody in the chat, but welcome all. And for those of you that are joining us for, you were with us for the first meeting, and now you're again with us again for the second meeting. Appreciate you joining us again. Okay, so I think we're ready to get going. So the LCAP, Local Control Accountability Plan, is a supplemental budget that we used to satisfy a couple of our own local goals, board goals, but also these 8 state priorities. And so the money we spend is geared towards specific students, and we'll identify those students later. But the priorities that we need to address are these 8. In particular, what tonight's meeting and discussion will be about is number 2 and number 4. The majority of our instructional goals and goal 1 action items are really towards the implementation of academic standards, but even more specifically, student achievement and the outcomes for students along multiple measures. And you can see here our local goals that are also aligned to the 8 state goals. We focus and condense those to 4, with tonight's focus being on students being college and career ready via high quality instruction of state standards as measured by state, federal, and district measurements. So we'll go through a series of metrics at the beginning of tonight's presentation to just give kind of a mid-year check-in on how we're doing, what our scores and data looks like from last year, where we have that data, and how we support going forward. And then the second half of tonight's presentation will still be centered on goal 1, and we will look at our action items, expenditures that we've made this year, and plan on continuing going forward. Not in the slide is that we are in the second year of a 3-year cycle with our LCAP. So you'll see in a minute when we get to our metrics that we're measuring our progress in year 2. We will do this process again at next year, and then we will start to revise and do a more significant overhaul of our LCAP plan at the conclusion of year 3. So this slide that I just pulled up is information about our unduplicated pupil count. And unduplicated pupil count is a fancy term for students in specific subgroups that are the drivers for the money we receive for our LCAP. We call these dollars supplemental funds because they are in addition to the base funds that we receive as a district. Unduplicated itself means these students do not get counted twice. So if you look at this graph and you really start doing the math and trying to add up across the board from free and reduced, foster, homeless, and English learners, that the numbers don't necessarily add up in that total unduplicated count. The reason being is we do not get to count these students more than once if they are in multiple criteria. So that's where the term unduplicated comes from. But you can see that the categories of students that drive this funding. And then we also direct the vast majority of this funding back to these students to provide services, increased services for students who are participants of our free and reduced meal program, foster, homeless, or English learners. Of significance in this slide, you'll see that in 2020, 2021, our total unduplicated pupil count was 5,414. We saw a decrease last year. You can also see a decrease in our enrollment, overall enrollment. For this year, our overall enrollment stayed static to last year, but you see a slight increase in the number of total unduplicated students. So we're hoping that this is stabilizing, but the trend over the last handful of years has been declining enrollment, especially with our unduplicated pupil count. One area where we for sure have identified some increase is at our high schools with the number of English learners. And a lot of these students are either refugee status or immigrants from the Ukraine, Russian area, or Ukrainian, Russian speaking families, also Armenian as well. But that is a traditional trend for us to have Armenian immigrants. The new trend is Russian and Ukrainian. So just a little bit of an overview. If you want more information about funding and how we receive these funds and the overall district budget and how the supplemental budget fits into that, please look at the slides and video from our last LCAP meeting. So the next series of slides will be on our metrics. And these are specific to goal 1 of preparing students to be college and career ready. Before I jump into these metrics, did anyone else on our panel tonight have anything to add? So again, our goal of students being career and college ready via high quality instruction is the goal that we're trying to focus on with the measurements that we have here and our actions that are listed later. And please do feel free to put any questions you have in the chat. We can pause or suspend the presentation momentarily to respond to any of the questions you may have. So LCAP Goal 1 metrics. So just a quick summary of how this slide and future slides are organized. Our first column is the metrics. So this is what we were saying we want to do within the goal. The second column is our 2020-2021 baseline. This was our baseline when we wrote the LCAP for this 3-year cycle. So this was the available data to be able to measure our metric against. You can see our desired outcome for 22, 23, 24 this year, and our mid-year update. And then this last part is status as far as meeting our total goal of having this accomplished, our metric. So in the first couple of slides, you're going to see a lot of CASP data. This is the SBAC that we administer in the spring. Last year, the SBAC was given or administered to all students in grades 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 11th are the students who take this assessment in English and math. Previous years during the pandemic and distance learning, we did not administer the CASP to all grades. So this is our first year of full data for all students included in this assessment. Also of note, the CASP changed and was shortened to be a shorter assessment than what it had been in previous years. the testing provider, ETS, they have stated that the test is still aligned and that the metrics should not change. The measurements or scale scores, proficiency bands are still accurate and should not adjust, but it's still worth noting it's going to be a slightly different test because of the amount of questions and time it takes to complete. So having said all that, you can see that across the board, there was a small decline in the scores last year when we compare that to the scores our district had in 2008, 2019, pre-pandemic. Of note, we're looking at English learners, social economic disadvantaged students, homeless students, and foster youth, because these are the students we identify as unduplicated and provide the monies and where the services are directed. We still have one more year. Next year, we will look at data again to see if we're able to meet our overall metric of increasing scores. I don't want to make any predictions, but last year was a challenging year coming off of distance learning. And so there was a lot of time spent providing some interventions, some opportunities to drill down and review standards from a previous grade. During the pandemic, our approach was to look at specific standards that were most critical for students to progress to the next grade level. So I think there's no school or no district untouched by the challenges of distance learning in the pandemic. So we're not any different than any other school or district seeing some slight decrease in our scores, although ours is a little bit less than what we see at the state level or other comparable districts. So this next slide is more English language arts information about how our students in specific subgroups did. Again, comparing the 2020 original baseline to our mid-year update. Students with disabilities, Hispanic students, GATE students, and English learners. Although now we're venturing into math, so we're seeing math on this last row. One interesting area that we did well is our Hispanic students actually outperformed last year compared to our previous baseline by a significant amount of 6%. So this is an interesting phenomenon for our Hispanic students who saw that increase. Students with disabilities are not necessarily included in supplemental funds or the unduplicated student count, but we do include them and look at their performance as well. And it's been a focus for us to look at increasing that percentage for those students, but we saw a very minimal decline for those students. Next slide is now all entirely math metrics. So this is the percent of our SED or socially economically disadvantaged students, our homeless students, foster students, and again, students with disabilities in regards to how they did in math. A couple of these groups, specifically foster, we did not have a significant number of students in this subgroup when we did our baseline, so we do not have a baseline for this group. So we will use the current baseline as our current data as our new baseline. But you can see here, math had a very slight decrease from our original baseline. Again, post-pandemic, after distance learning, first time we've been able to give the CASP assessment to students in 3 years. Here's our percent of Hispanic students who met or exceeded the standards, our baseline, and mid-year update from last year, GATE, and then down the last two columns or rows, excuse me, we're looking at all students. So this is including everyone. So you can see our overall trend for the district. Please feel free again to put any questions in the chat. I'm just going to take a second to make sure I'm not missing any questions there. Okay. Now we get away from CASP a little bit and the SBAC assessment, and we're looking at our English language learners making progress towards English language proficiency. So our baseline from the school year 1920 to our data from last year is that we are just a little bit below where we were. English learners being reclassified, we were at 18% and this last year at 17%. And that ebbs and flows sometimes depending on how many new English learners we receive as a district. The percent of fully credentialed teachers has always been positive for us. Although it's getting a little more challenging to recruit and fill vacancies, but we were able to start the year or at the time of reporting have all of our positions filled. Graduation rate for all students over the last year or two has been a very positive metric. Out of the distance learning and pandemic, we were able to take advantage of some opportunities to make sure students were able to graduate based on some assembly bills that were put in place to be able to adjust a few requirements during the pandemic. So you can see all students, we've returned back to our 96% where we had been about a decade or 10 to 8 years ago. There was a little bit of decrease going into 18, 19, but a really positive graduation rate last year. Across the board with our different subgroups, the graduation rate increased. So very positive for our upperclassmen that were about to complete and lost some time or some in-person instruction during the pandemic. Foster youth, again, not a significant enough subgroup to be able to track that data, but it is a required metric for the LCAP. So if that ever changes, we'll have a place for those students. Graduation rate for students with disabilities, our Hispanic students, again, all of our trends are trending in the right direction when it came to a graduation rate. The next metric is a little more boots on the ground, and in our classrooms, it's the percent of D and F rate in our middle school and high school. So our metric was to decrease that by 2%. You can see our baseline data from spring of 2019 and where we are. This is partial data from this fall, so we don't have the data from this spring, but we're in about the same place when it comes to those rates. Not a lot of change there. Also, our dropout rate is a little difficult to calculate because the CDE no longer calculates this, but we did our own local calculation of 2.38%. So we'll continue to work on that. Challenging year for students to finish out if they were struggling. This is looking at not just our 12th grade students, but a 4-year cohort of students that started with us and were not able to finish with us or another school district. Percentage of students on the early assessment program. So this is another measurement of CASP the SBAC specific to our high school students, our 11th grade students. And you can see that very little change from our baseline to current, with a decrease in the number that are not prepared. So vast majority of our students are prepared or approaching. Our percentage of A through G stayed pretty consistent, a slight bump in the number of students completing A through G. Percentage of student credit recovery increased very significantly from our baseline to last year. And we believe the reasoning behind that was that no online credit recovery was offered. So we see a much better pass rate for students when the credit recovery is in person. And even though this data was pre-pandemic, at that time we were offering some credit recovery online and are no longer offering that because of the higher percentage of students who pass in person. Our AP, advanced placement, examination passing rate is another metric that we look at. And again, that jumped last year from the baseline. So we were up 10% in the percentage of students who pass with a 3 or higher. These are usually 11th, 12th grade students taking those advanced placement courses. Couldn't tell you the secret to the sauce when it comes to that, but we will keep monitoring as far as why we're seeing that higher pass rate. So percentage of student expulsions from the district has always been 0 over the last handful of years, and it just continued. Compliance with Williams Act for instructional materials is a requirement to make sure all students are provided a textbook for all courses, and we've always been able to provide that. Parent participation in decision-making groups, DLAC, this group, the LCAP, PTA Council, that is a local metric that we look at to make sure we're compliant with providing information and conducting and holding those meetings. Percent of students proficient in English language arts as measured by our local district measures. So this is our own measure of proficiency. We have been using iReady as our own local assessment based on state recommendations and high saturation with other schools and districts using that platform. So you can see our middle of the year data indicates that 58% at elementary and 52% at the middle school are proficient. That's good data for mid-year. We would still see quite a bit of growth for students before the end of the year. So we're excited to see that go up when we do our end of year assessments. And again, that was language arts. The next one of the percent of students proficient using iReady as a local assessment. In math is also trending in the right direction, where static compared to last year at this time of year. So again, we'll still see more growth between now and the end of the year. Middle school is just a little behind where we were at the end of the year in 2020, 2021. So we will cover that ground, and I believe, again, be above that metric or meet that metric this year. Percent of students college and career ready will increase by 2%. That data is not available in the dashboard for this year or last year. We are not sure. I believe it will return next year using this year's data, but it was not the California dashboard where we pull that data from, and we're not able to calculate that data locally. So that is not available for, is not going to be available for this year's plan. Same with the A through G rate for college career students. The last one is a local indicator that we measure locally and report to the state through the dashboard, and that is access to a broad course of study. In our local audit or analysis, we are meeting that metric of providing open access for students. Again, a similar one, the access and enrollment local measure also met as a local metric through our own audit and analysis. Adopted course of study, also very similar of the last couple of providing open access, broad course of study, and all the materials and opportunities to be college and career ready that are required of a local district. This last one, the 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate, again, it's a repeat, but this is specific of the 4-year cohort, whereas the previous metric was just looking at our 12th grade graduation rate. I think the numbers are very, very closely aligned. That usually happens for our district because we retain our students for the most part.
Robin, going back to slide 14,
yep.
There was a question about the metrics, and that the question has to do with who are these students in this group? Is it Hispanic? Is it English learners? Is it SED? Is it all students? Who are these? So when we look at A to G, requirement fulfillment, who are these students?
Correct. So once we get out of the first couple of slides where we specify a subgroup, any additional metrics are looking at all students who would be included in that data. So for example, this early assessment program is all 11th graders. Percentage of students completing A through G requirements, it's all graduates. So unless it specifically says the subgroup we're looking at, these other metrics do include all of our students. Good question. And then I see that there's some action in the chat too in other languages. So Nuria or Anna, if there's anything for the group, feel free to ask that question too. Peter or anyone else was there? I want to make sure I didn't miss any other questions from the chat.
I didn't notice anything else. And then Sharon too, that is also monitoring the chat too, so.
Great. Thanks everyone. So now I'm going to turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Sharon Cuseo. She's going to lead us through the next series of slides. These are the slides, again, geared towards goal 1 of college and career ready students. And these are the actions that we include in our LCAP and the funding allocated to them.
Okay, thank you. So as Dr. Anders said, these are to support our goal. And the first one is elementary class size reduction in grades 4 and 5 at McKinley and Disney. And so we've been able to, with our supplemental funds, take the 4th grade average at McKinley to 25 and 5th grade to 26. At Disney, it's 24 in 4th grade and 22 in 5th grade, compared to the district average of between 30 to 32 for both 4th and 5th. The next item is extended transitional kindergarten, which we call ETK in our district. And I'm going to ask Dr. Kanopik to speak a little bit about that one.
So one of the good things is that due to the expansion of transitional kindergarten, we've been able to integrate the ETK, which were students who were turning of age in December, in January, and February. And we've captured all those students and continue to place them into transitional kindergarten. And in addition, we have been able to add to our transitional kindergarten students with birth dates in February, in March, and for this school year, April and May. Right now with enrollment, we're taking all students who turn 4 years of age between September 2nd and April 2nd. So all those kiddos are going to be placed into transitional kindergarten. And then we have a wait list of about 30 students with April and May birth dates who are turning 4. And depending upon how the configurations go, we'll be able to possibly place those students into transitional kindergarten. And just so everyone's aware that technically we only collect revenue on students whose birthdays are between, transitional students whose birthdays are between September 2nd and April 2nd. So the May babies and the December babies, we technically are not collecting revenue from the state. We will in future years, but it's a slow transition with the state. So, but once again, we're taking all of our babies who turn 4 years of age between September 2nd and April 2nd and placing them into transitional kindergarten. And then the waitlist babies, the 30-ish, will be notifying families over the next few weeks because we do have some seats available.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Long explanation.
That's okay. The next two items are to support our English learners. And you'll notice too that on these charts that are following, you'll see the action title, the budgeted expenditure, and the estimated actuals based on first interim. What that means is based on the first interim snapshot of where we are in the school year, how we expect to end the school year in terms of this item. So we've been pretty close and we've had pretty good budgeting so far. So for the elementary ELD specialists, we're providing those at all sites and also elementary ELD instructional assistants. And next slide, please. Now we're also able to support or at least partially support the dual immersion program at both McKinley and Disney, because not only is it for English only students, but the program also supports English learners. So that's why we're able to partially support those programs. And we do that by sharing in the teacher cost, the cost of the instructional assistants as well. The third item is secondary designated ELD, and that's a course for English learners. So this helps support the cost of 1 period per day at 6 schools, and it also supports the instructional assistants that support those English learners in those classes as well. The next item is for interpreters for second language learner parents, and we support all the schools in the district with that resource. Next slide. The next item is elementary summer school extended learning for English learners. This was an opportunity with the LCAP to really provide extra support for our English learners, and it gives them a lot more language development so that they can retain all of their skills from the school year and also get some prep for the following year as well. The next item was the preschool partial cost of teacher and instructional assistant for unduplicated students, which is that group of students that Dr. Anders went through at the beginning of the presentation. However, currently at this point in the school year, we are breaking even, so we don't need to support that program. So that's why there's nothing in the budget for it currently. The next item is professional development day cost for all teachers, and that's because all teachers have those subgroups in their courses, so we're able to support them with training, and we emphasize strategies on how to support all of those special populations. And the last item on this chart is our induction professional development teacher on special assignment. And that's the teacher who supports new teachers in clearing their credentials. We're able to support that with a 0.2, which is 20% of their assignment, because we can emphasize how we support and how we, what the instructional strategies are for those special populations. Next slide. So the next one is peer assistance and review teacher on special assignment. That is also 0.2 or 20% assignment, and that is to give extra support and assistance to teachers who need it, who may be struggling in a certain area. And this, again, proportionately based on the fact that they work with all of the teachers, work with all students, we can support them. The next item is the elementary response to intervention for reading, language, arts, and math. And that is our intervention program. So for elementary, our intervention teachers are what we call the RTI program, really addresses all of the students at all of the schools in elementary who are not meeting all of the grade level targets. And it provides the teachers and materials to support that program. The next item is middle school psychologists, and that's 2 full-time psychologists. And those services are specific for providing services to our low-income students, English learners, foster homeless youth, our special groups. Next item is for teacher support and professional development for instructional technology. And again, that's 0.2 or 20%, which goes to helping teachers with technology, but in particular, this is an emphasis on supporting those students in those special groups. The next item is behavior specialists, and it's for 2 of those. Again, we have many more behavior specialists, but these are really dedicated to helping our special groups. And then the next item is our English Learner Program Maintenance of Effort. And that is the minimum cost to operate the English Learner Program across the district. So that's why that number is so high, because it's the complete program. The next item is full-time curriculum specialists for all elementary schools, and they provide services to all students, but in particular to our special populations, and they monitor the RTI program, they monitor student progress, and are really in charge of managing the whole system of support for students at each individual elementary school. And the last item on this chart is our library coordinators at the elementary schools, who again provide services to all students, but then also have special programs for our special groups. The next one is our professional development teacher on special assignment, which we did not fill this year. And that was a 20%. The next one is our GATE program annual identification assessment process, and that's base funded, which means that this is actually not out of the supplemental funds, but out of our general fund. So we have money set aside for that. We also have a 0.2 or a 20% assignment for our district GATE coordinator to manage the testing in the program. And then we also have money set aside for music instrument repair and replacement. And again, all 3 of those items are out of our general fund. The next item is also general fund, and that's secondary art supplies and materials, which is split up among the schools. The next item is world language courses at middle schools. When we first started this process with the LCAP, that was one of the first things that we did, was add funds for world language teachers, but out of the general fund. The next item is to provide support for students with disabilities to achieve their IEP goals, and that's out of the general fund as well. Then we have, and that's part of our foundational program. The next item is targeted support for At Promise students who are in the GATE program. So we have 5,000 set aside for that. Those are students who may be in those special populations who may have needs in that, but are also in the GATE program. And the last one on this chart is elementary music teacher staffing. And that's funds for 2 elementary music teachers. And again, that's out of our general fund.
A couple of questions, Sharon, that came in through the chat. So for the middle school psychologists, do they also serve special education students? And answer to that is yes. They're very involved with our special ed students, providing assessments, identification, and support. And then, yep, another question was when it comes to the special ed support and centralized support. The centralized means a lot of the personnel involved at the special education department at the district office that provides specialized support that they can be distributed out to the different sites. Sharon, if you want to share more about that.
Yeah, that's correct. And usually that means that we're helping to support personnel costs for people that are providing that service, but I don't have those exact expenditures at hand. We can definitely, if you email me, I can get that information for you.
But the 43 million represents salaries and benefits primarily for all of our special education staff.
Okay.
Including teachers.
Thank you, Dr. Knopik.
Surely.
I wanted to note some of these base funded items are included in our LCAP because they're items that are required by the state or LACO. And so we include them as items, even though they're not using supplemental funds. Additionally, other items there's requirements from other grants or funding that we may receive that require them to be included in our LCAP as well. So that's why you see some of these base funded items as part of our LCAP plan.
That's correct. In particular, when it has to do with music or career technical education, we're required to put those into the LCAP, even though they're funded out of the general fund.
Our behavior specialists, the people in elementary school, yes and no. Typically, behavior specialists are working with any populations that have behavior concerns or behaviors that need support. Typically, what you see in the most classrooms is an instructional aid for that support.
And we don't want to confuse this with our at-risk intervention specialists. That's a different position.
Another question, does Monterey receive funding out of the secondary arts supplies line item?
Yes.
Yes. Thanks.
Any follow-ups on these? So that is the last of our actions for this year's plan in regards to goal 1. We do have additional actions that we aren't sharing or looking at tonight, but those actions are primarily in support of goal 2, which we will discuss in our next LCAP meeting. Goal 2, if we circle all the way back to our local goals, is about providing students with a physically, emotionally, and mentally healthy environment. So you'll see counselors and some additional items when we get to that topic. But if we get back to where we were with today's presentation, one of the things we want to start a conversation about is parameters for any supplemental carryover that we may have, or if we see a potential increase in supplemental funds. But again, that's unlikely because of the declining enrollment trend that we've seen. So things to consider as we move forward with this LCAP going into next year as the 3rd year of this 3-year cycle. Districts cannot delete or reword anything from the previous year. So that's why you see some of those items listed with $0. District cannot go back in time and delete a goal. District cannot add actions due to additional, districts can add actions due to additional funds as long as it supports a current goal. So any one of those 4 goals that are local district goals. The district cannot add a new goal, so it will not be until the conclusion of our 3-year cycle that we can revise our goals or add. District can revise, but the district has to write that there is a revision to a budgeted item. So that's not a goal, but any of those specific action items can be revised potentially. The district can't add new positions with carryover as the funding is not ongoing. So that's one of the challenges when we look at being able to use any carryover funds. It's just important to note that we are spending down any reserves. So we are in a budget deficit in out years. So we may need to budget a carryover to be able to sustain our current programs as opposed to adding.
And Dr. Andrews, if I could interject, you might have said this, but these parameters came directly from the Los Angeles County Office of Education staff, because we had a question about whether or not we could add or delete current action items. And so from that question, LACO went ahead and shared with us these parameters. And so we're again sharing it with the community of things we can and cannot do on this multi-year plan.
So I wanted to share what was previously proposed. So these were proposed actions from last year. And some of these did make it into the LCAP for this year with any carryover or additional funding we were able to identify. So you can see support for ELD classrooms. That did increase slightly in this year's plan. Secondary summer school stipends was put in place. iReady and intervention costs did not. They're separate funding for iReady, and I don't believe we made additional intervention sections or funding for that. Diversity, equity, and inclusion supplemental materials, about $5,000 was added, and you'll see that in goal 2 or goal 3. And then our translation services was increased slightly from the previous year. And so we the same action item, just a slight increase in the funding. Some preliminary proposed actions that have already we've already shown a need for next year would be to provide additional support for CTE pathways, and specifically support for unduplicated students to access those pathways. Another item that we've seen a need arise this year is orientation support for immigrant students. So circling back, we spoke about an increase in the number of English learners at our high schools. And those are a lot of immigrant students that are new to the country. So we're looking at ways to provide support for them to transition to American schools. Additional sections to reduce class size for SEDI classes. So this could look at additional FTE or 0.2s, not a full position, but adding additional sections to current positions. So we are able to do that without increasing staffing, but could reduce class size for English language clusters that are in our classrooms. So those are preliminary proposed, and those are shown here because they support goal 1 of our LCAP. The next slide is left blank intentionally. So we will have 2 more subsequent meetings. The next meeting will be on educational services and our metrics and goals, or excuse me, actions that are aligned to that goal. And then our 4th meeting will be our discussion that is based on this slide of looking at any predicted carryover, and any by then we'll also have some predictions on the funding that we will have for the future year. So please bring those ideas, start thinking about any topics or any actions that our parents, students, or anyone participating in tonight's meeting, any ideas you have or concerns that you would like to see us increase services. Again, if we're using our supplemental funds, they need to be directed towards those unduplicated students. And with that, I have our contact information. For those of us that are presenting tonight, Dr. Paramo will be the lead presenter for our meeting 3. And we're here for any additional questions through the chat or any other concerns you'd like us to be aware of. But this is the completion of our presentation and our slides for this evening. Please join us again going forward. And I'll take just a second to leave this presentation and share our LCAP website that has those future dates. So again, meeting 1, video of meeting, those slides. Tonight's meeting, we will upload the video of tonight's meeting in the next couple of days. And then March 8th is our next meeting on Goal 2, Educational Services. And then Wednesday, March 29th, we'll have a more of a discussion about our budget and potential carryover for the future year. So I'm seeing the chat. We don't have any other questions. So have a safe and happy evening. I guess we don't have to worry about driving home. Hopefully we're all at home and can just log out. So anything else for anyone to add? Okay. Thank you all. Have a great evening.